Okay, we'll begin. So hello, everybody. My name is Ben Munson. I'm a senior technology specialist with FarmQA. Today, glad to be joining you talking about our quarterly update. It's been a little while since we've last did a What's New in FarmQA. We generally kind of slow down with webinars in the summer, understanding that people may not be able to get down to a computer to watch these overviews. So this is there's a lot of content to go through in this webinar. So we will have this recorded. It'll be available, and you can rewatch this if you miss content or you want to slow it down and go step by step with what I'm going to show. But with that said, we're going to jump in to this Q3 highlights. And so main thing that we added in, or I should say a large component, is a task functionality. And so that's the bullet point number 1, managing work assignments by creating and assigning tasks for scouting, recommendations, and more. So this is going to help either growers manage farmhands, or on the agronomic side, if you are a manager, you can be assigning tasks to your team of scouts, your soil samplers, and managing return intervals on that field checks. Additionally, we'll talk about custom markers. So this is a function that we've added in, which is more or less GPS points, which would be coded by whatever data type you're capturing, and then allowing you to associate data to those pins and see trends over time on that geolocated information. Then we'll talk about analytics insights, and so this is just some updates that we've made to our analytics capabilities that we want to showcase. And then same or similar concept on the satellite imagery. We've made some improvements around our functionality there that we'll showcase. And then time permitting, I have a few extras, more or less small features that we were able to get in that I will walk through as well that might be of interest to you as well. So we're going to start with task and unpacking this one. So when it comes to tasks currently, we have the concept of assigning tasks for soil sampling work, for scouting, for a review task. And a review task would be a scenario where somebody scouted, perhaps a junior scout, went out, checked the field, and they would like an agronomist to review their scouting report and flag it for needing a treatment recommendation. Finally, application is a fourth type that we support currently. And this would be taking that application that may have been written by an agronomist and send it to a custom applicator who can then navigate within the mobile application, get to the field, pull up the field entrance, and can apply that product. Finally, there are other types coming soon. So as I show this, just note that this is kind of the first version of tasks. And as we build this out, we're going to kind of support custom types. So you could really use this functionality that's to really meet your needs and go beyond just our defined list currently. So please note that. With that, I always like to say that the product kind of speaks for itself. So I'm going to jump into a web demo and show off some of the functionality that I just mentioned. So with that said, I've got controller up, which is our web interface. And hopefully everybody is seeing this on your side and the webinar keeps it up. But what I'll point out on this screen, so if you're a current user, you're familiar with the fact that we start you on a map view, which displays your field boundaries. You can see in the legend in the bottom right, it's breaking down crops, acres, number of fields. But what I'll point out and start walking through is our work or task functionality. And so on the left-hand side, you'll see this is a new button within the product called Work. And within Work, we have a couple options or tabs. So first of all, you're viewing a list of all of the current tasks that are within my enterprise or account. But to start with, what I'll do is I'll bring you over into task types. And so this is where I mentioned initially the kind of the 4 types that we currently support, and I'll be talking through. We'll be adding additional kind of task types and a custom task type for you in the future. But to start with, we have a blue plus button, which allows you to create a task. And so you can call this whatever you want. Let's just say CAM application. And then you can choose kind of a hard-coded task type that associates to that, and then click Save. And so that's going to be how you create your task types within the program. Once that is done, there's different locations within the product for which you can assign or create tasks. And so what we'll start out talking about is kind of the core assignments, which is going to be around scouting and soil sampling. So to do that, one of the places you can create tasks is within your Fields tab. And so what I'll do to start with, I like to group this by my crops, which I did in the top right. But for these tasks, I'm going to start out by doing some soil sampling tasks. And as I do this, note that last week's webinar was all about soil sampling, and I touched on this as well in more detail. And so please go back and watch that on YouTube if you'd like more details on the soil sampling story around tasks, because I'll go fairly quickly over that right now. So what I'll do is I'm going to grab two fields. So I'm going to select those within my field list, and then the top right allows me to schedule tasks. Now, as I mentioned, two of the kind of hard-coded types that we're going to talk about first would be scouting and soil sampling. This case, I want to do soil sampling. It brings up a list of the fields that I've selected, and the icon on the left indicates that we have no points kind of predefined within this task. So what I can do is I can click into that and choose if I want to define points as far as where that sample collector should go. A couple options here. We have our menu button in the top left, which allows you to control and drop pins on this map. The pin icon here indicates that we have existing points for this field. So perhaps you uploaded, maybe you sampled these points in previous years. We can choose to bring those in or push them into this work item or ticket. And then furthermore, you can choose which of those points you feel you want to sample this year. And so for example, I'm going to select a majority of these. Now, in addition to choosing existing pins, you can also drop free-formed pins, if you will. So you can drop or kind of tap within that map, and you'd have the ability to then set additional points. So for example, I've got 4 additional points along with what I did last year. So I will save that particular ticket. And now you can see that that icon changes to say that there are indeed points associated to that particular field. An additional option, so if I click on this 192 field, what I'll do in this case is instead I don't have existing points, meaning that you don't see that pin icon here, but I can create a grid from scratch. And so let's say I want to create a grid at 2.5 acre intervals or spacing. I can key that in, and then I've got controls here where I can move those pins laterally. I can rotate them to orient correctly with the field. And then once I'm happy with that view, I can commit those points. They will be clipped to the boundary. I can still edit these. So if I want to delete out pins, move them around for whatever reason, you can do that. And then you can save this task. And so those are two scenarios that we support. You can also do what we call ad hoc sampling, where you don't have any pins defined and you just go out in the field and start to do more of a composite scenario and drop points more or less freehand. Next, this gets into kind of a key view when it comes to tasks, where you can set things like when it comes to soil sampling, sample depth, a finish by date, so maybe this needs to be done by the end of the month, a priority, and then you can choose who it gets assigned to. The key thing to note is that this list will be restricted down to whoever has access to see these fields. And so with that, we can walk through creating users and setting up roles, but you'll note that this is going to be restricted and there's no, I guess, permission or data privacy concerns because of that. So in my case, I'm going to assign this to Soil Sampler Jim, and I can add a note here to say collect all samples. So once we save this, that has now created a work item or 2 tasks within our system. What we can do at that point is if I jump over to the mobile application, what you'll notice here, again, starts you out in the map view, but we have the work items tab at the bottom right. And so this allows us to see any of those tasks that we've created. On the mobile app, keep in mind that I'm a super user, so I can see all tasks within the program. This would be similar to an agronomy manager, a head agronomist. But if you were, let's say, just that scout, you would just be seeing the tasks that were assigned to you. So much more refined list that just pertains to your activities that you need to get done by certain points in time. But to showcase this, because I assigned this to Soil Sampler Jim, I'm going to go back out and view all my points. And then I wanted to point out that you can sort this list by finish date, by priority, or assigned to, or by distance. And so you can apply, and now you can see that in this case, these are grouped by my scouting task versus my soil sampling tasks. And then we have on the right-hand side the due date. Red means it's past due, blue means it's upcoming, red means it's further out in the future. The icons on the left indicate the priority. So red exclamation meaning high priority, needs to happen soon. The bottom two tasks, these are the two that I just created. So let's say if I go into field 192, I click on that ticket, I see the details with my note in here. I can add some notes. So as a collector, I can define new locations if I want. I can view the instructions from whoever created the ticket, and I can add my own notes to say, I skipped this field, it was too wet. So now that's going to be saved along with the ticket as a note. If you did want to start the task, you could jump in and we will pull you into that particular field and allow you to start soil sampling. So that's going to be using that blue plus button, which drops a pin with your GPS location. If it's within a radius of an existing point, we'll pull up a barcode scanner, which you can then scan, and then we'll flip the bit on that point to indicate that it was collected. So that's one scenario. The key thing here is you can then submit that. One note to point out here is that you can still update that last note to say, okay, well, in this case, I didn't actually skip it. That was just an example. We'll say completed, all samples collected, and save that with that ticket. And now it gets completed off my list, and I'm left with just the other field that I did as part of the series. So same thing, I can come in my second field, view those points, collect, submit. So that's the experience from the collector standpoint of seeing these tasks and what needs to be done in what order. Another kind of flow to talk through here is on the scouting side. So from this perspective, if I do that same or similar, I should say, flow, but we'll do this with scouting data. Let's say I want my scout to check these two canola fields. You can select them from your list view. Don't forget that you can break it down by a particular producer. So you could say, check all of Munson Farms canola fields by filtering, for example, filtering maybe the ND Farms, and then you could do a select all on all those fields as well. But this time I'll do scout. And so we skip that first screen where you define points, and we just jump into an interval of when they need to be scouted. Still have the priority. Let's say that's a high priority. Assignee. So I set up a junior scout. So we're going to say he's a person that needs to do this particular job, and I'll leave the instructions blank. So now we've created those two tasks, and just note as well, so I showed on the mole view how you can see all tasks, but you can also do that from the web. So I'll show that now from the web interface. You can group this to see all the tasks that are assigned to individuals. So here's all the tasks that are for me versus junior scout versus soil sampler. And so within this, you can reassign, you can view details, you can click in here to view the details of the ticket, or you can jump into the field by clicking on the highlighted field icon. So this is a view for seeing all. You can sort and filter or collapse down to somebody you're looking for and then manage the details there. You can also show completed. So if you want to show past tickets, you can see that here. But now we'll jump into the kind of the scouting flow on mobile. So what I did is I created two new tasks. We do auto sync, but because I created these in real time, I'll just force a sync to make sure we have the latest. And in this case, I have the canola fields for the junior scout. So 193 and 33. What I'll do here, I'll click on 33. This is, again, is the details. I can customize these notes or add notes as the scout. But the key thing here is being able to use that blue icon, which will jump me into the field view. Note, if you're a brand new fresh scout, you've clicked on that task to say, okay, I was told to scout this field. It pulls up the map view. One thing to note is you can use this built-in navigation button, and that will navigate you to your field turn-by-turn directions. So that's a component of the map view and pushing over GPS locations. We can also, as the agronomist, I don't have it defined in this field, but an agronomist could set a field entrance, and then we would navigate more specifically to that location. Regardless, getting into actually scouting. So now let's say on this canola field, I'm going to scout, we'll say overall Field looks good. Watch the, we'll say wild oats in southwest corner. I'll submit that. Now this is brand new functionality that we're excited to showcase. So with this scouting report, we have a couple additional options. So because I was a junior scout, I want this report to be reviewed by an agronomist or a manager before it hits the grower's eyes. And so I want to retain that check mark. If you didn't want that, you can default to off, meaning that it doesn't need to be reviewed by anybody. Perhaps you are the agronomist or you're an independent. You can turn that off. But then you may still be interested in scheduling a follow-up task. And think about this as a return interval. So if you just scouted and let's say you're close to a spray threshold, but you weren't quite there, you may want to come back in 3 days to say we need to really check those wild oats, make sure we're keeping up with their growth stage. So you can set that, or vice versa. That field looked really good. You could say a return interval of maybe 10 days. And so with that, you can add a note as a reminder. I'm actually going to go with the other scenario of a really tight window, and we'll say, watch the wild oat patch when you return. Southwest corner. So now once we submit that, as soon as I click this submit button, it just submitted the scouting report, but it also simultaneously created a follow-up, a work item for myself. And so to experience or to see how that works, we will jump over into the scouting reports. And so these are all the previous scouting reports that we've done in the last 7 days. The field 33 is a field that I just did. And so let's say I'm the manager here. What you can do in this instance is you see the work items in the bottom right. And so you can see if it's set up for a review task, I could complete that. Let me run a refresh here. So I should be able to complete that work item task when I've actually reviewed it. And so that's what we'll talk through here is myself being let's say the head agronomist. Let me go back into this guy here. So now as a head agronomist, I could complete a task, but then the key thing here is I could then write a recommendation. So oftentimes think of it as the junior scout, check the field, the agronomist needs to write the accompanying recommendation. So now they can come in here, search all their possible canola mixes, find the one that they want. And then within here, you can see I've got my products. You can still tweak these rates, kind of basic recommendation functionality here. But then you can submit, and now that scouting report has an accompanying recommendation. The last work item type that we mentioned before was custom applicating or delivery. So if we click on that advice tab, we'll now see all the treatment recommendations that exist in our account that might be outstanding or we're done within a period of time. So it's set to today. We can see that treatment recommendation I just wrote, the Liberty clethodim combination, is a recommendation. It's not assigned to anybody, but it's written. If let's say you're a co-op or a retailer, you can select that particular application and schedule it for an application. So in this case, I've got my recommendation, and let's say it needs to get sprayed, by the next 2 days, high priority. And then again, I can assign it. And in this case, let's just set up, I've got ND driver, North Dakota driver, as one of my custom applicators. And so you can say, whatever you want within this node as well. And then that's a ticket that will be sitting in the mobile app for that custom applicator. One thing to note, going back to kind of security and permissions, if you are that custom applicator and you would open up your mobile app, you'll only see that one ticket to say, go spray this field. So it's very much a restricted view for that driver of what they need to apply and when. So those are kind of the key components there of going from soil sampling is it's kind of its own set of tasks to scouting, recommendation, review, application. A couple of things to note once we're in this view. So if let's say I'm going to group this by who it's assigned to, a few of things to point out within this view is that we can jump into different views. So from here, we have links, if you will, back to scouting reports. And so these are review tasks that have been written or that have been auto-created. And within this, we can click on that scouting report. It'll pull up the particular report. And then from here, you can complete that task with a date. as the reviewer or agronomist. And so those are kind of live buttons. But the other thing to note is the same thing functions for soil samples. So if you sampled, you can then click on that link and say, okay, where did you sample? Well, if you click on that beaker icon, it's going to pull us in to that field and associate us specifically to that work item of where you collected. The very kind of a brand new function here as well is that we added, so you can manage these tasks, like I was saying before, by multi-selecting and controlling, completing, or assigning from this view in bulk. But you can also do this from a calendar view. So jumping into a view like this, you can see, I'll just kind of collapse this out for simplicity. You can see all of our unassigned tasks. So this would be an agronomist that said we need to do these things, but then you can choose who does them by saying, okay, this is a scouting task, so you can assign that to a particular person on Monday, and then maybe your junior scout, they need to do this on Wednesday. And so you can be assigning kind of through this calendar view and the flow chart for this setup. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a lot more coming on this in the future. I think if you're an agronomist through a co-op or retailer, you can use this full flow. If you're an independent, a lot of times that return interval functionality would be nice, as just knowing what to check in what order with those return intervals. But then also we see a lot of value on the grower side here with different task types coming for tillage, spraying, harvesting, and just managing labor forces through this as well. So with that, if you got any questions, put them in the chat, and we'll be addressing those at the end, but we'll move on to a few other topics for now. So with that said, that's our task function. We also added, we call them markers, but it's a concept to, previously, I should take a step back. Previously, you could do things like set up soil sampling points or scouting locations. What we've done recently is eased off on the requirements around those points and made it more of a customizable marker situation. So what I mean by that is within settings and markers, this is where you can see the marker types. So think of these as GPS flags that you can set within FarmQA and then upload data to them. But the beauty of the system is you can create new types. So let's say I click the plus button and I want to drop a point for tile inlets. What you can do within this is give it a name, a description. You can choose from different icon types. So I will do, in this case, let's say I do a sprinkler head and I save this out. I can create another one. Let's just say that this is, you can see I've got one for wild oats. Maybe I want to do one for, let's just say large rocks. Maybe you're riding a combine and you want to be flagging where you're seeing maybe rocks that need to be removed in the future. So I'll pick a flag icon for that. So that's how you can set up new types of icons. Note before we leave here that you can bulk export these. So think about that as soil samples. You can export all of your soil sample location pins into one shapefile through the download button here. But then in practicality, the reason you do that or how you could use this feature is that you can then overlay the series of points on your map. And so for example, what I'll show here is insect traps. So on that previous screen, you notice that was one of my overlays that I had. And now on the map, you see where all my insect traps are throughout my demo data. And as you zoom in, you can drill in further to see where those traps are specifically within fields. You can tap on a field, so you can see specifically across this field. I was looking at rootworm maggots, so I was doing those accounts and associating them to the different traps. But the beauty of doing this is now, let's say you view this within analytics, you get an average view of those rootworm maggots and sugar beets, but then you could also view it by marker. So it splits out that data. You can view it independently and look at trend lines across traps. So that's kind of one use case of what we're doing with those markers. The other examples are what you can do with them. So you can set up, like I was saying, tile lines, soil sampling locations. But as far as getting that data in and starting with this function, what you can do is you can easily define those from the mobile application. So let's say I am going to go to that insect trap field. And within this mobile application, I can slide up from the bottom and I can overlay all those insect traps. And so I can see those traps and let's say I was out scouting, if I tap on that trap, it's going to allow me to scout and fill out information specific to that trap, which contributes to those trend lines. And so that's allowing you to do that type of information gathering. But then you could also have multiple pins on a field. So let's say if I jump over to my field 117, I've got different data types on here. So I've got insect traps, but I could also turn on my scouting points, soil samples. And so you can see I've got this interactive map with multiple overlays on it. Now to define new locations, all you have to do is either tap on that map or use your blue plus button, which will use your GPS. And then you can use this drop marker at location option. So within this, it pulls up a list. Now let me do a sync here. It'll pull up a list of all your marker types. Because I just added 2 new ones, I'm gonna have to force a sync. Traditionally, you really wouldn't have to do that. But then back in that field level, so if let's say I tap and drop location, now you can see those tile inlets and the large rocks as those 2 new types that I had. And so let's say this is a tile inlet. You can give it a name, say north side, and now that will create a new marker on my map. And so I could turn those off and maybe just have a set of inlets. And so you could set maybe a southwest one, and I'll do a southeast. So this is really flexible in how you want to use this. But then again, the beauty is associating data with it and seeing data over time. So another practical example of this would be wild oats. So with that emerging in the similar locations, you can map this out, and you can see I've done this in my fields in a particular corner where I've mapped out where the wild oats were, but you get more of a holistic map. So you can say next spring, 2023, you want to target those locations. So you can send your scouts out there via task like we just talked about, but then they would be able to pull up, where were those wild oat locations from 2022, so they can go out and check those. Well, they could turn on that wild oat layer, and then they could navigate based on their GPS right up to those locations and check to see if it reemerged. So that's another practical application of the markers. The other thing I was going to say, instead of just defining within our mobile application where those markers are, we also support a bulk upload. So one of the other kind of extras I was going to show is that we added field boundary export, and I'll use this as part of showing off my import functionality here. So within the ... of the more icon, we added just an individual field boundary export. So I'll export this field just to show off that functionality, and then I will turn around and import that into this other account. So I click the blue plus button on the bottom right, and now I can drag and drop that shapefile I just got downloaded, and it will upload that into this particular demo account, and we'll just call this demo test and assign this to sugar beets. But then what I was trying to illustrate here is within our marker type. So if we bring the map pane back out, and let's say we're dealing with soil samples, what we can do is, before I was just turning on those layers to view them. If you want to bulk upload, we have a pencil icon here, which then allows you to drag and drop. So I've got my pin example. So this is going to be KML, shape files, CSV files of points. You can select an attribute to use as a name, and then you can upload. So that goes for any data type we just talked about, whether it's tile inlets or it's insect trap locations, wild oats, whatever it may be. You can bulk upload through those pencil icons into your layers. And we will automatically clip those to fields. And so let's say you had a soil sample map or a file that had thousands of sampling points across hundreds of fields. You can upload just that single file, and then we will geospatially understand and know what points are within a boundary, and we'll clip and associate those to a particular field. So it's a easy way to, if you use a different software product for sampling, for example, you can export import as a transitionary phase or just consistently year to year as well. So again, that's the functionality around markers. We'll take questions at the end, so feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll circle back to those as well. So next, we'll talk about analytics. So we added a few things around analytics, and with that, some of this might be a review for some users, but we have an analytics tab on the left-hand side. What we are after with analytics is trying to allow you to roll up data across your inputs. So for example, you're using FarmQA for crop scouting, you have weather data in the system, you've got treatment recommendations, you've got uploaded soil data. You can now start to look at that data holistically and look at trends across, fertility or nutrient levels, or maybe looking at your weather information in a dashboard that can be saved and pushed to a grower in a grower portal. So you can be branded software, have them looking at their precipitation data or GDUs. So that's just kind of a summary of what we're after with analytics. But a few things that are new when it comes to our report tab, we previously had just a large grid that you could manipulate session by session. And so, for example, this is all my data with each line being a field. And then I'm comparing things like looking at my nutrient levels versus looking at my scouting data for disease and imagery and insect data. What we added and what we allow you to do is to slice this into saved grids. And so that's what's new in the top left is you can see all my saved grids. So if I just want to see imagery data, now I just see my average NDVI values. Or if I want to look at my weather data, I can filter that down and it's grouped by crop, and you can see your GDUs, precipitation data, etc. The way you can manipulate these grids, I'm going to go to my example grid that just shows everything. You can click into the edit mode in the top right. And now what you can do, if you want to, for example, group by crop, you can drag and drop that column into the header. So it groups it by crop. And then you can turn off columns. So let's say I'll turn everything off and say I want some of the basic information here around crops, varieties, acres. But then let's say I want to reproduce that weather grid. So I could just save out my daily GDUs, my season precips, and now it'll be just those columns in this view grouped by crop. So if I save this out, actually I meant to rename that, so we'll call this weather grid 2. And now that's a saved view, which I can toggle back to and have that saved. Instead of having to kind of comb through this data to get at what you want, it's now saved down. Additionally, we added in groupings on the charts. And so, for example, we historically just had the ability to view something like this, where you had daily GDUs over time. So it was a single attribute grid, or I guess table or chart is a better term here. What's new is in the top left, we have this little right angle tool. This is a comparative tool. So if you currently have GDUs here, we could then also overlay, for example, daily precip. And now you can see kind of the background that renders. So we've got GDUs in blue. The black is representing the precipitation. But maybe we want to show that as a bar chart instead of line chart. So now we change that charting type. And maybe you also wanted to add in maybe your season precipitation. So season precip as well. And maybe we're okay with that being a line. And so you can combine multiple data sources on here and then interact with this view to maybe pull the data in and out. Maybe you want to use that cursor to compare precipitation versus those GDUs, or maybe that will go daily precip versus season precip as you see that accumulation increasing. So that's a tool that you can use. This is one example, but another example would be comparing nutrient levels. If you want to have your phosphorus line versus potassium, or nitrogen versus organic matter, you can do those comparisons within a field or across fields as well. So that's a new comparative tool. And then as you save that out, that will then be a saved grid within those dashboard views or within this particular interface to be seeing that saved group. So those are two new things that came on the analytics as far as improvements, and hopefully that allows you to kind of consume and compare that data a little better. So next we'll talk about imagery. So one thing that we did add on the imagery front is, let me go into different data count. So we pull up, in this case, we're going to pull up a planet 3-meter resolution image. But we added the ability, or we're allowing you now to create zones based on that imagery and variable rate prescriptions. We can do this based on gridded soil data as well, which is in my previous webinar, if you want to go back and see that. But what I'll do in this particular case is I'll showcase pulling up a high quality NDVI. So let's just say we're going back to a period in July, or June rather. And on the left-hand side, we added these little thumbnails so you can view or kind of understand what the images are representing through this period of time. But then what's new is this little icon here, which allows you to generate the zones based on this particular image. So our use case up to this point is just using these NDVI images to apply, let's say, growth regulators or nitrogen. And so with this, it's kind of a introductory zone creation tool. So you've got a name, so we'll call this webinar demo, overlay a label, and a clustering algorithm. You can kind of read about what each one does, but this is how we're going to create those zones, or the math behind creating the zones, if you will. You can set a minimum zone size or polygon size, the number of zones you want, and a color ramp. And then this will process that data and break it into those associated zones. Now at the bottom, we now show those breakpoints. And so now you can manipulate those and show, or let's say you want that zone 1 should be more representative. You can play with that breakpoint until you get to a zone you're comfortable with. Now you can save this out as a profile. So all the settings that we had as far as the clustering method and zone sizes, color schemes, that gets saved out and can be reused next time you're creating a zone map. But you can also submit that. We can turn around, and within that zone map, we can write a prescription. So let's say we're writing a growth regulator, and you can put in, whatever units you want with this, and that's going to be outputted as a shapefile. So maybe this is a pounds per acre application. If I were to download that, you now get a shapefile produced based on these zones and a rate per zone based on that imagery. So again, my soil webinar kind of talks to the other side of this. This is what we have so far. We're working to build this out. This is kind of a beta tool right now for zones and prescriptions, but did want to tease it out for anybody that's interested in taking a look themselves. So we're coming up on time, but I'm going to point out a few other things, relatively quickly, but you can always pause the video, watch it in replay, or feel free to ask questions if you want me to drill into any one of these things. So we added the ability within any given field where you can put in an average yield. And this just allows you to do comparisons. So for example, on this field I just added as part of our demo, what I can do is I can put in a harvest date. So let's just say I harvested these beets, let's just say late September, but then I can put in a yield. So let's just say I got 19 tons per acre. As I save that out, that's now tracked as yield. And the benefit of doing that is then you start to see, you can do comparisons within the analytics tool, like I just was showing with the precipitation and GDUs. You can start to look at yield across fields. And so, for example, if I come into 2022, you can start to look at, let's just go into 2021. I've got my, let's see, back in 2022, I've got your yield amounts can be in here, your harvest dates can be listed out. There you go. So I'll group this by my beet fields, search that. There you go. So now you can see all my yields and harvest dates across those fields. But then within our new soil tab, so we've got, oops, jump back in. So we've got a new soil tab where you can now start to look at comparative soil data. So if I come in the new soil tab and I go to my prescription field, this is what I want to show. So if you start to enter in yield data, you can see down here, we're now showing you your average yield that you entered and how that compares, in this case, to other corn fields with min and max and your average across all those fields. So you know that this one is falling just below average. And so that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg on our side for just getting some yield data in and start to provide that to you for making decisions around fertility or looking at when you have your soil sample data in this case. The other thing, so we showed you the export map view. We also support that from the list view now. So let's say you wanted to export all of your corn maps or corn fields. You can multi-select, and then from here, we added an export button. So you can export your fields, and then just those boundaries will go into a shapefile. And so that's just a tool if you're moving boundaries around, if you're doing custom applications, you can get those maps out to those machines. One of the last things I'll touch on here is that within our scouting tools and rec writing tools, we added a map selection. And so this is at the request of customers that kind of thought about selection more spatially opposed to a list view. So for example, if I wanted to write a recommendation across multiple cornfields, traditionally you could select fields in this view and then write your recommendation accordingly. What's new is that this map tab is now available. So you can click on that, and now instead of working off a list view, you can search cornfields, and maybe you see your GPS location and say, well, I know these are the fields that need that recommendation, or that batch rec. And so this works on batch scouting and batch recommendations, where you can now just select from the map view, and then you can also go through that flow of choosing your products, your rates, etc., and submitting. So with that, we're really pushing up on time, so I think I will leave it at that. There's a few other smaller things that I would encourage you to look at our newsletter to review and look through, but hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the things that we've built. And if you got questions, as always, you can contact me or send an email to info@farmqa.com. So within here, this is just a walkthrough of where you can push those questions. So I'll be getting to those very shortly here. Within Teams, there is this little question mark icon, which you can then type questions into. And then as far as contacting me regarding anything I talked about, or kind of maybe ideas of things, improvements we could make, or new features, my email is there with a phone number. So go ahead and take a screenshot or write that down, and then we'll be taking questions. So that'll be all for now. Appreciate you tuning in and looking forward to some questions that you may have. Thanks again.